Local people, important issues. CBS 10 WILM's weekly focus on the Lower Cape Fear region. This is Byline Wilmington with your host, Don Ansell.
Well, a very good morning to you. May 4th is primary day in North Carolina. One of the issues the voters in New Hanover County will be deciding by referendum is a quarter-cent sales tax increase for the county to help bridge an estimated $13 million plus budget gap. And that's what we're talking about this morning with our guests. New Hanover County Manager Bruce Schell is joining us, along with New Hanover County Commissioner Ted Davis Jr. Good morning. Thank you both for being here.
Good morning.
And before we start to talk about the sales tax itself, I've heard some criticism about using the primary ballot rather than the November election to put this referendum forward, because historically primary voter turnout is much lower. What's your response to that, Bruce?
Well, I think probably the most practical comment would be that you've got to put a budget together by law, and you've got to present it to the commissioners in May and then again in June. So it's just not practical.
So you couldn't wait till November to put it on the ballot, because you have to know where your money, and you need a balanced budget. That's by law.
You have to have a balanced budget, and there is a budget crisis this year, so the sales tax was critical to be on the May primary.
And then there's that recent survey that revealed that about 80% of the people don't trust government on any level, national, state, local. They say government doesn't have the ability to manage things, to make good decisions, to be truthful and transparent about what's going on. Ted, being an elected official, what's your response to that?
One of the things that is very important as far as the sales tax referendum that's coming up, early on I thought it was very important that if this was going to be done, that we needed to be transparent with the people of New Hanover County. The government needed to let the people know the situation we were in, the dilemmas that we had, what we were looking at having to do in order to explain why this sales tax was being put forth, and the pluses and the minuses of whether it passed or not. So,
do you believe people feel that way?
Overall, I don't think everybody feels that way.
Do you think 80% of the people feel that way? That's what the survey said.
Well, that's who was surveyed. That doesn't mean everybody that lives in the county feels that way.
So you think people do trust government?
I think there are people that do trust those that they have elected. I think they err on the side of caution, that most people will tend to criticize government negatively rather than to praise them positively.
Bruce, any comment on that? Do you think government is getting a bad rap, or do you think some of it is valid?
I think...
I mean, the ABC situation, I don't want to get into it, but it certainly didn't look good for the way government operated in that area.
Yeah, but I think the good news is that the steps the commissioners took and the actions of the interim board have created accountability and transparency that organization hadn't seen. So that's a case where
it's true, but people would say
did do what it
if
was
the
supposed
Star
to.
News hadn't have uncovered all this, it would never have come to light. Let's talk about the $13 million plus or minus budget deficit. It's
sure.
Your projected expenses are about $13 million more than your projected income. And is that accurate about what you're looking at?
It really depends on which formula or which list of expenditures you look at. Actually, it's a little over $11 million, but the schools want an additional $1.8 million on top of what they have previously asked for. So if you add that into the mix, that's where you get up to the almost $14 million figure.
11 million, 14 million.
Right. 13.8.
After a while, you're talking about some real money. Right. So the options are for bridging that gap, whatever the figure is. The options are what?
Sure. And looking at how to address this, it's the same thing we go through as commissioners every budget session that we have to do each year, and that is when you find out that there is a gap, there are only two ways to address it that I know of. That either finding the funding to address the excessive amount of expenditures over projected revenues, which means raise taxes or some other alternative revenue source, or you have to cut services.
So cut spending or increase revenue.
It's
the only two options there are. Now, if the sales tax, this quarter-cent sales tax passes, I think you're projecting like it'll add $5 million.
For this fiscal year, because it would not be in place for the whole year. So for the first year that it would be implemented, it would be projected $5 million worth of income. Thereafter is projected to be anywhere from $7 million or more.
So if the sales tax is approved by voters, will that avoid an increase in county property taxes?
The answer to that would be, when we had a budget session, what I did, I was trying to come up with something to give us a model to work by. And in doing so, I started out with all the projected revenues versus all the projected expenditures, and started with that gap. And if you use the $5 million that would come from the sales tax if it were passed, the most direct answer to your question is no, it will not.
It will not guarantee that you won't raise property taxes.
Because $5 million doesn't equate to anywhere from 11 to 13 million deficit. So what we would still have to look at is, what are we going to do with that remaining deficit amount? Do we raise taxes to cover that, or do we cut services? Well, as you know, you've known me a long time, and I do not like to raise ad valorem taxes. So part of that mix, Don, that we're looking at is a little over $300 million of bonded debt. That is debt that will come forth as a result of the taxpayers and citizens of this county voting for the school bonds, Cape Fear Community College, and the park bonds. So when you vote for bonds, I look at that a little differently than everything else, because when you vote for bonds, you know they're going to cost, and you're voting to meet that expenditure.
The public has a short memory.
I know that.
Yeah.
But if you look at that, that's basically less than a penny. So if you put that to the side and take that out of the mix, in order to address the rest of it, like I said, you're either going to have to cut services or come up with some sort of, I don't know of any other alternative revenue source that we have available to us other than the potential sales tax.
You manage the county. What would your suggestions be of how you bridge the gap of what the sales tax will bring in and what the rest of what you need?
Well, we're preparing two budgets for the county commissioners to consider. If the sales tax does not pass on May the 4th, then we come in with, here's how we balance it through expenditure cuts. We did make an assumption that we would get the equivalent of 1 penny on the tax rate to cover the increase in bonded debt, which Ted referred to. And making that assumption based on some budget work sessions.
That's a penny on per 100.
Yes.
For property tax.
That's correct.
So we know that's going to be there no matter what.
Well, that's the assumption going in.
If it's passed by the commission.
Right, if the commissioners vote for that. Beyond that, I mean, if you've got to make up the remainder, $8 to $10 million in there, then those are, you've got to start looking.
You have some options for that?
We do.
Okay, we're gonna hold. We'll talk about that, and maybe selling Airlie Gardens is an option. We'll find out when we come back. Stay with us.